Good morning, Legends. My name is Azrael Eternity, and welcome to the League of Legends patch notes for patch 4.21. Now, for this patch, we are still in preseason 5, so we're still getting through all of the changes that Riot is trying to implement before season 5 starts. And that includes some buffs, some nerfs, and some fixes. So, the most notable in this patch is the big nerf to Warwick. Now, Warwick in 4.20 was absolutely OP. It's freaking insane. And I even abused that to the point where, I was playing top Warwick Smite. Things that Foxdrop has done and Voyboy has played. And it was just absolutely OP. So they had to nerf him. But I think that they over-nerfed it, because not only did they nerf Warwick and his skills, but they nerfed two of his core builds. They nerfed Skirmishers and Devourer. So we'll get into all of that. So first things first, we're going to go into the champions. Now for champions, Rek'Sai is going to be added in 4.21. Rek'Sai is absolutely amazing if you haven't seen her on the PvE. Players like Odd1, Wings of Death, and many others have been playing her to great effect and coming up with really good builds for her. The tunnels, man, the tunnels are going to be absolutely insane. I can't wait to see this champion being played in regular queues. Azir, not so important. Cassiopeia, not so important. Cho'Gath got a huge buff. His feast is now reduced by 50%, his feast cooldown is reduced by 50%, and the mana cost refunded if it kills a minion or a monster. Now, this forces Cho'Gath to have a choice of whether or not to save it for going after champions or using it to go after some creeps. It does allow it to be a little bit of a comeback mechanic by having that reduced cost, because then he can get back to full stacks faster without having to wait that monstrous cooldown. They did nerf the cooldown itself, so it's going to be 80 seconds at all ranks. But like I said, if you're using it to kill a monster or minion, then you're getting half of that cooldown refunded, so it only ends up being 40 seconds. So it can be a little bit of a pain, but 60 seconds for using it was alright, but being able to get that 40-second cooldown is going to be much, much better. Corki, not a lot to say. His Phosphorus Bomb got nerfed. It's going to only have 1,000 missile speed instead of 1125, so you'll be able to dodge it a little bit better. Doesn't really apply to us junglers, but Diana had a huge buff because she got her R refunded if it was interrupted while attacking, while being queued up onto a queue. So if you had hit somebody with a Q and you're going into your ultimate, if you got interrupted during that, the ultimate's cost gets refunded, including the cooldown. So you can just kind of immediately go back into it, which is a really good thing for Diana, because if it got interrupted before, she just kind of sat there. She lost most of her damage. So it was a good thing for her. Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks got nerfed. Fiddlesticks got nerfed hard. And the reason I say that is because his passive, Dread, got nerfed into the ground. It is no longer a AoE passive where it reduces enemy magic resistance by 10. Now it is anybody that he has dealt magic damage to or has cast Terrify on. And it reduces it still by 10, magic resistance by 10, but it only lasts 2.5 seconds. So no longer does it have that big AoE. So that kind of makes sense. I think it's probably a smart move, but it is still a nerf. So I'm going to call it what it is. His E also got changed so that it now only will prioritize targets that have not yet been hit by the crows. Now, that's not to say that it's not going to hit the same targets over again. What it means is that it's going to prioritize other targets that are available. So if you're using it to clear the camps, it's going to prioritize the ones that haven't been hit yet, and then it'll randomly bounce in between. But if you're using it in lane, say during a gank, if you hit the enemy champion, it'll hit the minions next, and it won't most likely bounce back to that champion, unless it's the only target left. So what this also means is that if you have a stack of minions that the enemy champion is hiding behind, you can hit it essentially with fair degree of accuracy, bounce it from the first minion all the way back to that champion. So it is a buff in that sense. Galio, meh, his R no longer is reduced by tenacity, which I think is a good buff for Galio. It's something that he needed. Jarvan had his Cataclysm. This was just a fix. His Cataclysm, if he was interrupted during mid-air, it would not do damage, which is what it's supposed to. But in some cases, he would land, it would create the Cataclysm, create the barrier, the land barrier, and he would die, but it still wouldn't do the damage. So now, if the crater is appeared, it should deal damage. That's what the plan for it is. Jax. Jax got a huge buff, in my opinion. His E got its cooldown reduced by 2 seconds at all ranks, now starting at 16 and finishing off at 8. This is good for jungle Jax as well as laning Jax, because that means that his stun is going to be up more often. Also, his ultimate got buffed, in a sense. His base values got reduced, but his overall ratios got buffed. So eventually, it'll catch up pretty quickly with how his ratios work. So he'll kind of get that buff back fairly quickly. Jace's Hypercharge doesn't really affect the jungle, but it can help affect your ganks. His W now goes off cooldown when he finishes the third hit, as opposed to before when it was being cast. So essentially, he could cast it, wait a few seconds, use it, and then immediately recast it when it was at max rank. So that is kind of a good thing. Jinx got a clarity update so that you knew when you're using mana for Fishbones. Kennen, I didn't really pay attention to. Lucian got his passive nerfed. It's no longer 6 seconds, it's down to 3 seconds. And the ratio got dropped down at earlier levels, so it'll kind of make him a little bit weaker in the early game and mid game because his ratios are lower on the attack damage. Nocturne got a buff, in my opinion. Let me go through my notes. Nocturne got a buff. He gains according to this, it gains a massive, it doesn't list the percentage, movement speed increase when moving towards feared targets. And that's going to be something that it isn't just limited to Nocturne's fear, it can be anybody that's applied a fear to. So if Fiddlesticks or Hecarim applies a fear to somebody, Nocturne gets a movement speed bonus when moving to it. It's going to be an area of effect sort of thing where he has to be within a certain range. So if you think of it kind of like Soraka with her passive to be able to rush towards hurt allies. So Nocturne got a buff in there. Pantheon got nerfed. He has reduced base attack speed, and his attack animation actually got quickened. So that, I wouldn't consider that a buff. That's just more clarity. But yeah, his attack speed got nerfed down from 0.679 to 0.625, and the whole reason for this is because they saw all of these different videos of people doing level 1, 2, and 3 dragons with Pantheon and taking next to no damage. So they wanted to kind of fix that. They thought that that was a little bit broken and kind of are trying to make it a little bit more even for people. So they had to reduce his attack damage so that his passive wasn't being procced all the time. Rengar, this was a fix. Bone Tooth Necklace was actually being affected by cooldown reduction, so now it will act the same as most trinkets and only not benefit from that cooldown reduction. It will act just the same as other ones. Sejuani kind of got a buff, essentially. I call it a buff-ish. They removed a lot of the burst damage from Q. You can see it here that it no longer scales with percent target max health, but instead W scales with percent max health now. So essentially what it means is that her upfront burst with Q is reduced, but her sustained damage during fights is actually increased, which works out a lot better for her should she survive the early game, which in my opinion Sejuani is still a really weak jungler from what I have seen of other players. She's not really played in high elo competitive. So I'm not sure that this will affect her and put her back into favor. I doubt it. But they removed the upfront burst from her Q and allowed her to have some more AoE sort of damage from her W and her E to essentially still have purpose in the fight aside from the upfront. Shen got a little bit of a buff. His Shadow Dash got reduced energy cost, now from 120 down to 100, which is a good thing for him. Shyvana got a really good buff, in my opinion. Shyvana got a buff to both her Q and her W. Her Q now has 1 second reduced cooldown at all ranks, so instead of being 10 down to 6, it's now 9 down to 5, and she still has the passive of that Q where any auto attacks will reduce its cooldown. So that's a good thing for her, meaning that it'll be up more during fights, whether it be a team fight or dueling, because Shyvana is a very strong duelist. That's kind of why she saw a lot of play during Season 4 in the top lane in early Season 4 until some other champions kind of got a little bit better and they focused more on the AP mages or AP casters up in the top lane instead of big AD bruisers. Also, her W got a buff for jungling Shyvana because now Burnout deals a bonus 20% damage to monsters. It does not say minions, so this won't affect lane Shyvana, but jungle Shyvana, she gets a bonus 20% off of damage, and that's her good AoE damage. So she'll be able to clear a lot faster with that bonus damage. And she also got a little fix where Burnout was scaling incorrectly with her DAC damage when she was in a dragon form. So when a character has two different forms, they kind of have to make sure that they're both running properly, kind of like Gnar and Mega Gnar. Soraka got a little bit of a nerf with her health regeneration. Went from 4.675 down to 2.5, and her health grow stat was got nerfed down to 0.5. So what this means is that she's actually regenerating less health, so she doesn't have her heal available as often. So it's going to be a little bit harder for her to sustain, so she'll need to focus on hitting her Qs a lot better. Astral Blessing also got ability power ratio changed from 0.2 ability power to 0.4 ability power up to 0.4 to 0.8 because it scales with how her missing health works. So that was a good thing. Varus got a mana regen buff. And Warwick, this is the big nerf of this patch. I have never once seen a nerf so hard on a single champion. Like I said, not only to his kit, but also to his items. So he was overly popular, and he was banned out a lot, and he was targeted a lot. He's a very good champion in the 4.20 patch. 4.21, not so much. They reduced his Hunter Call duration from 10 seconds down to 6. Now, this isn't a huge deal, but during team fights it can be, especially in the late game when you're trying to push down towers. So you have to be more selective about when you use Hunter's Call. Probably not at the beginning of the engage, but when you're actually committed to an engagement and the enemy is committed back to you. So you kind of have to be careful about when you're going to use it. And especially when they're not giving you any sort of reduced cooldown on it, because I can't remember, I think it's something like 18-20 second cooldown at rank 1, and not a lot of people will max it first. I try to max it evenly with E, depending on what the situation is, if I need more of the attack speed or I need more of the chase, but that's kind of how it goes. Infinite Duress also got nerfed hard. It got its base damage reduced massively. It went from 250 down to 150 at rank 1, so it got nerfed by 100 damage. At rank 2 it got nerfed by 85, and rank 3 nerfed by 70. So that means that at max rank, instead of doing 420, you're doing 350. So it's a real hard hit to his base stats. So I'm kind of worried about how he's going to apply and how he's going to be relevant in the 4.21 patch, as well as going into Season 5. So we'll have to take a look at that. Yasuo's movement speed got buffed a little tiny bit from 340 to 345, but his Q, Steel Tempest, got buffed. It's now 4 seconds at all ranks. Now this isn't a huge deal because it was started at 5 seconds and went down to 4, but this means that you'll be able to have a little bit more leeway and not reduce his potential to be ganked, but also gives him a chance for some outplay by being able to have that Q available more often. Zac got a little bit of a buff. He now creates extra chunks when he has hits additional champions, with his E, the Elastic Slingshot, and it buffed the damage. It'll have the same damage at rank 1, but it actually gets a bonus 40 damage total at rank 5. Also, his ultimate, Let's Bounce, got its knockback range buffed from 250 to 400, and it'll actually knock up the champions and reflect the new range but the total amount of duration for the crowd control will stay the same. Mass got all the mass texture rebalances for Malphite, Malzar, Shen, Wukong, and Xin Zhao. Turret Gold got buffed because there's no longer that global Dragon Gold. They had to kind of buff up a little bit, turn it up a little bit to get some more global gold, because the gold overall per game actually went down, according to Riot. So that means that they wanted to try to get that sweet spot of gold for mid to late game. So they buffed up outer turrets from 100 to 125 gold, and inner turrets from 125 to 150 gold. The turret shielding, they had a nerf to because there were some issues with damage over time effects and the tower shielding, that they would be cycling between each other because they're both done per second. The turret checks to see if they've been dealt damage over the last second, and so the shield is essentially counteract damage over time, like Ignite. If you ignited somebody and they had hit it just right with the turret shielding, the shield would apply and then the tick for the Ignite. So essentially the Ignite would only be burning off the shield. Now what they changed was that it's now going to be checking if the champion has been dealt damage in the last 1.5 seconds. So any damage over time, the champion will they won't benefit from that shield because they've received damage. Death timers got changed. They got a 2.5 second buff, or excuse me, nerf, because death timers now, well, it depends on if you're being killed or if the enemy's or you're killing the enemy, I guess you could say. So it could be a buff or it could be a nerf depending on which side you're on. At minimum, death timer is now going to be 10 seconds instead of 7.5. Maximum death timer went up to 52.5 instead of 50. So it's a 2.5 second swing increase at all times. Experience rewards for killing champions went down by 50%. Minion gold, like I said earlier with the turrets, they're trying to get that gold back up to a good sweet spot. They changed it, so they buffed it a little bit, tiny bit. You get 1 gold each for range and melee minions increased. The minion health also has a change in the scaling of minion health, that it essentially will be lower at most times, and it'll actually get a little bit better in the late game, like running 50 plus minutes. Summoner's Rift changes. There's new music that changes throughout the game. There is an option that you can set it to just the default music. I don't play Summoner's Rift music. And there's some graphical adjustments throughout the map. Consistency for the lane brushes. And Baron no longer loses its out-of-combat regen if attacked from outside of his attack range. It used to be that if Baron couldn't reach you and you were attacking him, he would still have his regen, so now they fixed that. Baron is feeling festive also, they put, so most likely Baron has its Santa hat back. The item shop buying range, this was a fix, not a nerf, because this never should have been happening in the first place. If you were top lane, the actual buying range where you could purchase used to be fairly out. It was like almost past the Nexus turrets, I think. So now they fixed it so that it's the same for every position, and it's only limited to the platform. So you have to stand on the platform if you want to buy. A little bit of changes for the red and blue buff camps, so that area effect abilities should now consistently hit the same number of champions in all 4 camps. Also, the Krugs, they had in the top lane, in the red side, Krugs, they were actually switched, so now the ancient Krug will always be farthest from the base that it's located near. Let's see, Dragon. Dragon also got changed. And this was also in response to, like I was saying, the Pantheon nerf, as well as the buff to Jax, coincidentally, because the Fireball, the basic attack for the Dragon, is no longer considered a basic attack and is now considered a spell. This means that Pantheon and Jax cannot dodge it, or any other champions with a dodge or block ability, and champions like Nocturne or Sivir can use a spell shield to block the damage instead. So, I think that's probably a necessary thing for this. And also, fireballs will now track like normal targeted spells, which means that you can't move out of the way of them. They will follow you. No dancing, which means that the dragon will always finish its hits before it switches targets. So you can no longer juggle aggro for the dragon. Or at least you shouldn't be, anyways. There was a bug fix with Dragon being stuck outside of his pit when he hits terrain abilities like Anivius Crystallize or Trundle's Pillar. And dragons once again go drop souls for Thresh. I'm going to skip the Hand of Baron just simply because I wanted to focus on the Dragon Slayer buffs just really quick. They changed the first stack buff. It is no longer 8%. It's now 6% bonus attack damage and ability power. And they swapped the second and fourth stacks. So the second stack is now turret damage, and the fourth stack is now damage to minions and monsters. So I think that's probably a good idea because second stack you're probably still at least in some lanes still in the laning phase. So I think that's probably a good thing to go for. And then Hand of Baron, they nerfed it down to 180 seconds from 240, so you now only have 3 minutes, which actually makes sense in my opinion. Having a 3-minute uptime for a 6-minute or a 7-minute, it's 7-minute, 7-minute downtime. So they might end up changing that. Maybe they could change that to 3.5 minutes, to 210 seconds instead. Changes to the jungle buffs when smiting. Gift of Heavy Hands. Gift of Heavy Hands now has to have 5 auto attack hits to proc instead of, 6 auto attacks instead of 5. And Gift of Toadstool actually got a huge buff in my opinion. Well, I'm sure in everybody's opinion if you look at the numbers. Instead of being hits damage being 6 plus 6 times the champion level in magic damage over 3 seconds, it's now 4 times 8 times level, or 4 plus 8 times level magic damage over 3 seconds, meaning that at this rank 1 it will deal the same damage, but at all other ranks, all other levels, it will scale much, much harder. So at level 18, I didn't write this down, at level 18 it would do 148 damage now instead of, what would that be, 6 times 8, 60, 48, 108, 114. So 114 damage there was the old value. So huge buff, huge buff. Jungle Gold, they're also near, this isn't really a buff, well I guess a little bit of it is. Jungle camps are now worth 10 less gold. If you have a Hunter's Machete, you essentially get that gold anyways when you kill a large monster. If you do have a tier 2 or tier 3 jungle item, it's now 20 gold. So you actually get a little bit extra gold for the junglers, and they're doing that because junglers are actually falling behind on their camps, falling behind on the gold curve. So they were trying to do that. Changes to items. Negatron Cloak is back. Guardian Angel and Abyssal Scepter actually got changed so that they now include the Negatron Cloak again. Negatron Cloak actually has a build path now, so you still get Null Magic Mantle, and it'll be 350 gold. So they actually changed the gold value of it. It used to be 720. Yeah, 720, because it was the same as Chain Vest before Chain Vest got changed, because now Chain Vest is 750. Anyways, so Guardian Angel actually got increased in gold to reflect that change in gold. And Abyssal Scepter remains unchanged, but they changed the recipe. It no longer is 2 Null Magic Mantles and a Blasting Wand. It's now Negatron Cloak and a Blasting Wand. So, but you do have to have a little bit higher cost for the combining cost. Targon's Brace and Face in the Mountain. Basically, supports don't know how to last hit, so they raised the execute damage. So it makes it a little bit easier for supports to get those passive for the Spoils of War. Okay, jungle items. Jungle items I was talking about earlier. Jungle items got nerfed heavily, in my opinion. Actually, they all got nerfed. There's no buff to them. Ranger's Trailblazer got its reduced cooldown for Smite removed, which frankly I was kind of okay with because it kind of was a little bit OP with all of the different effects that Ranger's Trailblazer gives. It was really, really OP. Meaning that, like, with all the different things, the bonus HP and mana refund, the stun, the AoE damage, and the reduced cooldown, it was just too much good in one item. And that's why I had said Well, you won't see that video because now 4.21's out. It's no longer relevant. I had said in a video that I was going to be making that Ranger's Trailblazer is the go-to item for all champions. I still think that is true. I still think Ranger's Trailblazer is probably the best jungle item for all champions overall. I think it fits more people, more champions than any of the other items. So I still think it's a go-to one, and I think this is appropriate nerf, getting that 15-second cooldown removed. Poacher's Knife got absolutely nothing changed. It was just a tooltip change where it now will reflect the total gold earned from stolen camps, not just the bonus 20 gold that you got from the steal using the Poacher's Knife Smite. Skirmisher Saber got a big nerf. Like I said, Warwick got screwed over in this patch. It no longer deals true damage on hit. It instead will deal a scaling true damage based on level from 60 to 162, true damage over 3 seconds. This really screws over Warwick. So, for example, challenging Smite, if you and they even say it in the notes, stop at Warwick. Stop at. That if with the base value at even if at base level 17 damage, 17 damage times Warwick's ultimate, which is 5 hits, would have been 85 damage, and that's in 2 seconds. So instead of having it be and then having 4 more seconds to do more hits, massively reduced his damage. So now it's 60 to 162 true damage over 3 seconds. So essentially, this is a much weaker a much weaker Stalker's Blade, and doesn't get the slow. I don't know what the exact values of Stalker's Blade are, but I think this will have more true damage, than Stalker's Blade, but it lacks the usefulness that Stalker's has with its slow. So I don't know what sort of thing they were trying to do with skirmishers, because while I do understand that skirmishers had a very niche number of champions that it could be used on, Yi, Warwick, Fiora, and Tryndamere maybe. Now it's pretty much useless on everybody, in my opinion. If somebody thinks it's something else, yeah, I'd be glad to hear it, but it just got nerfed into the ground. Devourer. This was a nerf that needed to happen, in my opinion. I do agree that Devourer was a little bit overpowered. They just needed to tweak it down a little bit. Instead of having the base 40 magic damage on hit, it starts at 25. And like they said, it kind of reminds us of Launch Feral Flare. Feral Flare was very overpowered at the beginning, so they had to nerf it. And I can understand it, but again, it's something that hits Warwick specifically, in my opinion. Not that other champions didn't use Devourer, it's just Warwick. Lots of changes with mana regen. Everything got moved up, with the exception of Forbidden Idol. For some reason, it had a 60% instead of a 50%, because they were doing it in multiples of 25. Twisted Treeline, nobody cares. Dominion, nobody cares. Summoner spells, teleport. You can now teleport clicking towards on the map. That's just more of a clarity thing. Ability bar update. So now instead of having that little buff bar in your bottom left, it's now, some of these things are now back on your base one, like Health Potions, Crystalline Flask, Static Shiv, the Spoils of War and Tribute passives for the mana regen items. Muramana now has a specific toggle effect when active, and item borders will now match new active items. Also, team colors. Spectator view, loading screens, in-game chat, and kill callouts are now colorblind friendly, which means that it's not going to be blue team versus purple team, it's blue team versus red team, which is what it should have been all along, my opinion, being colorblind. I mean, I can tell the difference between blue and purple, but it's not a clear-cut difference, in my opinion. Legend of the Poro King will be in 4.21, excuse me. So look for that. Team Builder also got some changes where when you rejoin into a queue, it'll automatically select the same champion position and role that you had in the previous Team Builder. So that's also a really good thing. in my opinion, because if you're want to repeat play the same champion over and over, if you're kind of, trying to figure out a certain champion or practice it in a certain role. So that was a good thing. Also, team members can now adjust their specs while the captain adds solo slots up until the captain hits find solo players. So if you're in a group, you can still do your tweaks up until the point where the captain goes, all right, let's find the other team members. Suggested players will now tell you why they are suggested and how you know them, whether it be your people that are on your friends list or people that you've played with recently that were on your team or the other team is what it seems like it will end up being. Updates on the patcher, updates on frame limiting, that you can now have 120 hertz and 144 hertz display options for your screen, and a couple of story updates, some bug fixes, and some upcoming skins. I'm actually really looking forward to the Blood Moon Thresh and the Winter Wonderland Oriana. She looks really human in this. Here, let me pop it up. Yeah, she almost looks human. And I think that's kind of neat. And she has a Poro for her ball instead. And the Poro Rider Sejuani looks friggin' awesome. And she's throwing a Poro snack. Blood Moon Elise looks really cool. And then I'm just excited about having Rek'Sai. So that's going to do it. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed and found this informative. If you did, please leave a comment down below. And kind of sorry I was a little bit long-winded with this. There's kind of a lot going on in this patch. So, thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.